A leaked Pentagon email just exposed Trump's plan to punish his own NATO allies. Not Russia, not China, Spain, Britain, France, the closest partners America has had for 75 years. The memo was written by Elbridge Colby, the Pentagon's Undersecretary for Policy, the third most powerful man in the United States Department of Defense, and it lays out 4 specific punishments for any NATO country that refused to back the Iran war. Suspend Spain from the alliance, block difficult countries from prestigious NATO positions, withdraw American support for British sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, and force every member to the 5% defense spending floor. Reuters published it on April 24th. The Pentagon did not deny a single word, but the leak is not the story. The story is what the leak accidentally proved. Because Trump is not punishing Europe. Europe is leaving. And this single email, sitting in a Reuters inbox right now, just gave them the final reason. We obtained the full memo. We cross-referenced it with Wall Street Journal reporting, the Pentagon press secretary's official statement, and NATO's own founding treaty. What we found is not a threat. It is a confession. Here is what is actually happening, and why every American watching this video should be paying very, very close attention. To understand why this leak matters, you have to go back to February 28, 2026. That was the day the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated air campaign that hit more than 500 targets across Iran in a single night. Nuclear sites at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. Missile production facilities, command bunkers in Tehran. Within hours, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was reported killed. So were dozens of senior IRGC commanders. Iran retaliated within 24 hours. Ballistic missiles toward Israel. Drone swarms aimed at U.S. bases in Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait. And the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point that 20 million barrels of oil pass through every single day, was declared closed. 38 days of bombing followed. By April 6th, the Pentagon claimed 85% of Iran's defense industrial base destroyed. The Iranian Navy, gone. 150 warships across 16 classes, sunk. A ceasefire was brokered in Pakistan. It collapsed. On April 13th, Trump ordered a full naval blockade of every Iranian port. By April 24th, the day of the leak, there were 3 American aircraft carriers stationed in the Middle East. The first time since the invasion of Iraq. But here is the part the headlines barely mentioned. For 38 days, Trump was asking, and increasingly demanding, that NATO allies hand over their air bases, their airspace, their navies. He needed European basing rights to extend the operational range of U.S. bombers. He needed European airspace to overfly the Mediterranean. He needed European warships to help reopen Hormuz. And one by one, the closest allies America has said no. Spain refused base access. Spain refused airspace. Spanish PM Pedro Sanchez publicly called the U.S. strikes an unjustified and dangerous military intervention. The United Kingdom, America's closest ally on Earth, refused to allow offensive missions from British bases. Keir Starmer said publicly that Britain would not enter the war. France hesitated. Germany stayed silent. Trump's response was immediate and personal. He called Starmer no Winston Churchill. He called Britain's aircraft carriers toys. He branded the entire NATO alliance, the alliance America built, a paper tiger. And on April 1st, in an interview with Reuters, he said withdrawing from NATO entirely was, quote, beyond reconsideration. 23 days later, the leak dropped. Reuters obtained an internal Pentagon memo written by Elbridge Colby. 4 proposals to make Europe pay for saying no. But before we can understand why this email terrifies Washington more than it terrifies Madrid or London, you need to understand exactly what is in it. Let's start with the document itself. The memo was written by Elbridge Colby. Title: Under-Secretary of Defense for Policy. He is not a fringe figure. He is the architect of Trump's entire foreign policy posture toward China and Europe. When Colby writes a memo, it is not a brainstorm. It is a signal. The memo lists 4 proposals. We are going to walk through each one, because 3 of them cannot legally happen, and the 4th one is the only proposal that actually matters. Proposal 1. Suspend Spain from NATO. Colby's logic in the memo is direct. He writes that access, basing, and overflight rights, the Pentagon calls it ABO, is, quote, just the absolute baseline for NATO. If you don't grant ABO, you don't deserve membership. Here is the problem. NATO's founding treaty has zero mechanism to suspend a member. None. Article 13 only permits voluntary withdrawal, meaning a country can choose to leave, but the alliance cannot kick anyone out. NATO officials confirmed this within hours of the leak hitting Reuters. So why propose it? We'll come back to that. Hold the thought. Proposal 2. Block difficult countries from prestigious NATO positions. This one is real, and it is symbolic by design. The memo itself admits the proposal would have, quote, no operational consequence. Spain's military weight inside NATO would be unchanged. The actual goal, and Colby spelled it out in the email, was to, quote, decrease the European sense of entitlement. Read that phrase again. Sense of entitlement, as if 75 years of European blood, treasure, and political alignment with Washington was a gift Europe was somehow undeserving of. Proposal 3. Reassess American support for British sovereignty over the Falkland Islands. This is the proposal that detonated London. The Falklands are 8,000 miles from Britain, 300 miles from Argentina. The UK fought a 74-day war for them in 1982. 255 British soldiers died. 650 Argentine soldiers died. For Britain, the Falklands are not a piece of land. They are national identity. The United States has officially recognized British sovereignty over the islands since the war ended. The Pentagon memo proposed reversing that, as a punishment for Starmer refusing to bomb Iran. The catch: the US legally has no authority to alter UK sovereignty over a self-determined territory. The islanders themselves voted in 2013, 99.8% in favor of remaining British. But Argentina's President Javier Milei, a libertarian, a Trump ally, a man who has called Trump his political brother, went on radio the morning the leak dropped and said, quote, we are doing everything humanly possible so that the Malvinas return to Argentina. The threat doesn't have to be legal to be damaging. Proposal 4. Force every NATO member to the 5% defense spending floor. This is the only proposal in the memo that is conventional, defensible, and arguably overdue. NATO members agreed to a 5% target by 2035 at the Hague summit. Spain alone refused, insisting it could meet capability targets at 2%. But here is the detail almost nobody noticed. The memo does not propose closing US bases in Europe. It does not propose withdrawing from NATO. It does not propose pulling US troops out of the continent. Why? Because Europe hosts 80,000 American troops, the Ramstein logistics hub for the entire Middle East war, the Aviano nuclear sharing facility in Italy, American warheads stationed in Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Closing those bases would hand half the northern hemisphere to Russia and China overnight. Trump knows it. Hegseth knows it. Colby knows it. So when the Pentagon writes a memo threatening Spain and the UK, but quietly leaves the bases off the table, it is telling Europe something it desperately doesn't want Europe to figure out. And Pedro Sanchez, at the EU leaders' summit in Cyprus the morning after the leak, when reporters asked him about the threat, he gave a single-sentence response. Quote, we do not work off emails. We work off official documents and government positions. That sentence is not a diplomatic deflection. It is a statement of contempt. The most powerful military in human history just made a public threat. A country 1/10 its size laughed it off in 11 words. So ask yourself the obvious question. If the threat had any teeth, would Sanchez talk like that? So if 3 of the 4 proposals cannot legally happen, and Sanchez is laughing them off on camera, then what was the point of the memo? Here is where most of the coverage of this story has gotten it wrong. The memo is not a threat. The memo is a confession. To understand what the Pentagon accidentally admitted in writing, you have to understand the deal that has held the Western world together for 75 years. Since April 4th, 1949, the day NATO was signed in Washington, the alliance has run on a quiet exchange. America provided the nuclear umbrella. America provided strategic intelligence. America provided the satellite networks, the missile warning systems, the carrier groups, the deterrent. In return, Europe provided something less visible, but equally valuable: Diplomatic alignment, economic alignment, sanctions cooperation, a continent-sized partner that voted with Washington at the UN, bought American weapons systems, enforced American sanctions regimes, and backed American positions on Iran, Russia, China, and the global trading order. The cost to the United States was modest. The strategic dividend was enormous. For 3/4 of a century, no rival power could match the diplomatic firepower of America plus Europe, acting as a single bloc. That is the deal Colby just put in writing and broke. Read the language of the memo carefully. Colby writes that NATO must operate on, quote, reciprocity, that, quote, alliance benefits are not free, that allies must reduce their, quote, sense of entitlement. These are not the words of an alliance. These are the words of a transaction, and the moment an alliance becomes a transaction, every European decision-maker in every capital across the continent has to ask themselves a single question. What happens to us when our interests don't line up with Washington's? Because here is the part the Pentagon doesn't want Europe to figure out, but the leak just told them anyway. America needs Europe more than Europe needs America right now. Operation Epic Fury revealed cracks the Pentagon has been trying to hide. On April 22nd, just 2 days before the leak, the Pentagon told Congress that clearing mines from the Strait of Hormuz alone could take 6 months. 6 months. 14 U.S. service members killed, 400 wounded, reports surfacing that American missile stockpiles are running dangerously low. The Pentagon needed European bases for Iran, not because America was strong, because America was overstretched. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, without realizing what he was admitting, said it out loud earlier this month at a Pentagon press briefing. Quote, Iran's longer-range missiles cannot hit the United States, but they can reach Europe. Hegseth meant it as pressure. He meant Europe should fight harder because Europe is in range. But every European capital heard something completely different. If Iran can hit us, and not you, why are we fighting your war? And there is one more piece nobody in Washington wants to talk about, the political reality. Polls in Spain, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany show majorities, clear majorities, opposing the Iran war. In Spain, opposition runs above 70%. In Germany, above 60%. Sanchez is not defying Washington. Starmer is not defying Washington. Macron and Merz are not defying Washington. They are obeying their own voters. Trump is asking democratically elected leaders to overrule their own democracies for him. That is not how alliances work. There is a historical pattern here that most people have forgotten. It is the same pattern that ended the Roman alliance system in the 3rd century. Rome did not fall because its enemies grew stronger. Rome fell because it stopped offering protection and started demanding tribute. The provinces did not rebel openly. They simply stopped showing up, stopped sending grain, stopped sending soldiers, stopped answering the messages from the capital. By the time Rome noticed, the empire was already gone. That is what a confession looks like in 2026. Not a press conference, not a speech, a leaked email. Now, if you think Europe is going to sit quietly and absorb this, you are not paying attention to what has been happening behind closed doors for the last 6 months. Because while Washington was leaking memos to Reuters, Berlin, Paris, and London were quietly building something else. Something that has not been built since 1949. And it has a name. Most Americans have never heard the phrase NATO Fallback. By the end of this section, you will understand why Washington is praying you never do. On April 15th, 2026, 9 days before the Pentagon leak, the Wall Street Journal published a report that almost nobody outside the policy world noticed. The headline was simple, quote, Europe is quietly building a NATO fallback in case the US steps back. The reporting was sourced inside Berlin, Paris, London, Warsaw, and Ottawa. 5 capitals, all confirming the same thing. A second alliance, operational, coordinated, and structured, is being built inside NATO, designed to function the day America walks away. And here is the part that should genuinely alarm every American watching. It is already operational. Start with Germany. For 75 years, Germany was the country that blocked European defense autonomy. Berlin wanted America as the ultimate guarantor. Berlin trusted the umbrella that ended last year. According to people familiar with his thinking, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz concluded privately that Trump had confused the victim with the aggressor in Ukraine. He no longer saw values guiding U.S. policy. He concluded that publicly questioning NATO would be dangerous. So he chose a quieter strategy: take on more, keep America formally inside, build the fallback in the meantime. Germany dropped its 75-year veto. Then came the Northwood Declaration, July 2025. Britain and France, for the first time in history, agreed to coordinate operational nuclear weapons. 2 of the world's 9 nuclear powers, 2 permanent members of the UN Security Council, quietly aligning their nuclear command structures outside the American framework. President Macron went further. He publicly offered the French nuclear umbrella to continental Europe, so to Germany, to Poland, to anyone who wanted in. In April 2026, just weeks before the Pentagon leak, Poland and France conducted joint nuclear deterrence exercises, practicing out loud on the public record what European nuclear coordination would look like without American involvement. July 2025. Again, Germany and the United Kingdom signed their first bilateral defense treaty since World War II, mutual security assistance. Trilateral framework with France. 80 years of British strategic distance from continental Europe quietly dissolved. Then January 2026. Greenland. 8 European nations, Denmark, France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, the United Kingdom, Finland, and the Netherlands, deployed jointly to Greenland. The official framing was a joint exercise against Russian and Chinese threats. The diplomatic reality, according to officials present, it was a demonstration of NATO defense without the United States. Now look at the economics. The European Union plus the United Kingdom is a $22 trillion economy. The United States is $27 trillion. China, at $18 trillion, is smaller than Europe. Europe's combined defense spending is now $350 to $400 billion per year. Second highest on Earth, behind only America itself, 2 nuclear powers, France and the UK, roughly 1.4 million active duty personnel. The world's most advanced civilian aviation industry, the world's deepest pool of military-grade engineering. Europe has one weakness left. 1. Strategic intelligence and satellite warning networks. Right now, those still come from America. The reconnaissance satellites, the missile launch detection systems, the signals intelligence backbone. But the European Space Agency, the German BND, French DGSE, and British GCHQ are all racing to close that gap. Defense industry analysts inside the WSJ reporting put the timeline at 4 to 5 years. That is the window, and the political signals are now public. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has openly questioned, on the record, whether Washington would honor Article 5 obligations under the current administration. Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause, the single sentence that holds the entire alliance together. Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez went further. Quote, American behavior is pushing Europeans toward alternative security arrangements. That is not a threat. That is an announcement. Which brings us back to that one Pentagon email, that single document. And the one question Washington still has not answered, the question that may define the next 20 years of global power. So here is where we end up. A leaked Pentagon email, 4 proposals, 3 of them legally impossible, 1 of them defensible, none of them, not one, that scared a single European capital into changing its position. You came into this video thinking it was about Spain getting punished, about the United Kingdom losing the Falklands, about Trump bullying NATO into line. It was never about that. This was a video about America punishing itself. For 75 years, through Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Reagan, every president from both parties, the United States spent enormous diplomatic energy preventing exactly the Europe that is being born right now. A continent that decides its own foreign policy on Iran, on China, on Russia, on the Indo-Pacific, on global trade. Every American president since 1949 understood that an aligned Europe was the single greatest strategic asset the United States possessed. Trump is accelerating the exact outcome every one of those presidents worked to prevent. Former NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said something this month that almost nobody picked up on. He warned publicly that the alliance's survival is no longer guaranteed within the next decade. He did not say that because of one leaked email. He said it because the leak is one of many signs. So let me tell you what is actually at stake for every American watching this. The day Europe achieves full strategic autonomy is the day American sanctions stop working everywhere. It is the day Europe stops buying American weapons systems by default. It is the day Europe stops aligning with Washington on Taiwan, on Russia, on Iran, on the global trading order. It is also, and this is the part that should keep policymakers awake at night, the day the dollar starts losing its reserve status, quietly at first. Then all at once, empires don't fall when their enemies grow stronger. They fall when their friends stop showing up. And right now, in capital after capital, across an entire continent, they are quietly walking out the door. The Pentagon thought it was sending a warning. It was signing a confession.